everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing a review for Assassin's Fate by Robin Hoob, the final book in the realm of the Elderlings. So getting started with where we are at the beginning of this book. It starts out with Fitz at Kilsingra on his way to the servants on a revenge quest because he believes that they killed Bee. They definitely kidnapped her. He thinks that they also killed her in the process. But we are also following Bee, who we know is alive and has been captured by the servants and is being taken to the same place that Fitz is headed, so their paths will eventually cross. Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this book. Overall, I liked this one better than the second book, which isn't hard to do because I hated that second book actually. Like, the farther out I get from it, the more I'm like, that book, I just hated it. So at the moment, within the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, my personal ranking is the first book is still my favorite. It was great. The third book is probably my second favorite. It was good. And then the second book was just, I just did not like that book at all. So I definitely enjoyed this one more. There are some things that didn't quite work for me, and especially that I was getting very frustrated with the Fool as a character, but we'll get into that. First of all, let's just there are so many things I feel like that we learned more about this time around. I mean, in general, we learned more about the Fool's backstory, which I had mixed feelings about because I'm like, I don't really like the Fool as a character that much, and so I'm like, I kind of want to know more about him because it's relevant and mysterious, and I feel like maybe if I knew more about him I would like him better, but also I'm just like, I don't really care about this character. We also though learn more about the servants because we do get to spend some time with them. So that was interesting and also like horrifying. Find out that Bee has the skill, which up until this point I had really been wondering because she was so sensitive to Fitz's skill, or his skilling. We actually learned that she does have the skill to some degree. She was able to do some healing, and then there was also that combination of the skill with being a white prophet, and I think there's something special about the combination of those skills or magics or abilities, which made her particularly powerful. There's some other things that are maybe not like brand new information, but are more so confirming other things, like the fact that the skill is essentially the silver that the dragons drink, which I think we knew before, but they more explicitly talked about how Fitz's skilling feels very similar to the dragon magic, and that the silver is like the skill river that he has encountered before, and that Verity marked Fitz as if he, the way a dragon marks an elderling, which I think was interesting. We knew that Verity marked Fitz all those books ago, but I thought it was really interesting that the dragons recognized Verity's mark as another dragon. They didn't know who he was, but they were like, another dragon has marked you. So I just thought that was really interesting also. Okay, so those are some of the things that I was thinking about that were just oh, that's something either new and interesting or confirmed information. Some of the things that I liked about this, one is just we got more Bee. Bee is my favorite character. I love her. I love getting her perspective, and I'm just so glad that we got more time with her, and that the book was more evenly split between Bee and Fitz. I also just continue to love Perseverance. I love him as a character. Of course, he still has so many situations where I'm just like, why are what are you doing? Don't make that choice. But I just love him as a character, even when he's being stupid or making mistakes. Also, he's one of those characters where for so much of this, Fitz is wishing that Perseverance wasn't there and is trying to get rid of him, and is always Perseverance just should not be here. And yet he ended up being so invaluable because he is the only one of them who isn't influenced by the skill. He has no connection to skill magic, which means that he was immune to any of the skill-related manipulation, and like allowed him to kind of save the day in certain situations. So love him as a person, but also love that for him that, like, even though, you know, Fitz was always trying to send him home, he ended up being so important to their mission and their ability to save Bee. And there are just also times where, like, his determination, his perseverance, but also his, like, faith in things, like how much he worked with Motley and really believed, like, she knows what she's talking about. Like, this bird can figure things out, and then they were able to use her for communication. Like, his, like, you know, faith and dedication to things, just excellent. I love him. Perseverance is great. I also loved it that Fitz and Night Eyes get to reunite, even if it's just like in spirit. I don't totally understand how that worked, but I'm not gonna question it. I just really loved that they got to reconnect before the end. Although it was funny to me that, like, you know, once we got to hear, like, once Night Eyes was in Fitz's head again, it, like, really reminded me just how dumb Fitz is sometimes. Like, I always know this about him. We get to hear his thoughts. But when you get to, like, contrast his thoughts with the practicality of the wolf's thoughts, and because Night Eyes can see Fitz's, like, actual thoughts, not just what he's, like, showing outwardly, you can just be like, oh my god, Night Eyes, you're so right. Like, Fitz is being so dumb and so self-pitying. And not that he doesn't deserve to be self-pitying in some ways, because, like, he has had a rough life, but also, like, having them reunite just reminded me of all of that. Okay, other things that I loved. I actually really liked all of the, like, cameos that were in this book. I think there are, like, essentially every prominent character that we have previously met in a Hoob book shows up in this final book. And I think that Hoob does a really great job of bringing characters back in and doing these cameos in a way that they feel like the same character. Sometimes when, you know, things like that happen in other books, it can just feel like a totally different character, and I think that Hoob does a really good job of weaving these characters together and also having them still feel like themselves and be really recognizable from previous books. And so I really loved how this last book really tied together, like, pretty much every previous book in the entire realm of the Elderlings, which was great. And then finally, I also loved Bee's relationship with Thick. Like, the two of them are so sweet, and they were just, like, I love that Thick is the person that Bee connects with the most at the palace, because I think that makes so much sense for them. Anyways, I just loved their relationship and dynamic. It was so sweet, and it was great. Then a couple of things that I didn't like so much in this. Number one being, I just don't like the Fool. I have never liked his character in general, but this final trilogy and this final book have really driven home, like, that I dislike his character, and really why. Because there were things about him that I kind of always disliked, and then this final trilogy, and especially the final book, really brought to the forefront what it is and helped me really, like, pinpoint what it is I don't like about him. I think that I need to kind of think about this a little bit more to articulate it, because this is not something that is specific to this individual book. This is something about his character across the entire series, but it has a lot to do with the Fool not respecting Fitz's boundaries, and I think that they have a very unhealthy dynamic between them, and it just, like, just because Fitz loves the Fool doesn't mean that it is a good dynamic or relationship for them. And I don't like the Fool or their dynamic, and it was something that I found very frustrating throughout this book, and was one of the things that really would slow me down while I was reading it. Honestly, I read this book surprisingly fast. I read it in like a little over a week. This is an 850-page book, and it usually takes me at least 2 weeks, if not like a full month, to read one of Hobb's books. And like, so overall, I liked this book clearly. I read it so much faster than I normally do. But there were some points where I kind of like dreaded having to go back if I knew like the next chapter was going to be a Fitz chapter, where if the Fool was going to be around a lot, because I just was getting so annoyed with him. Back to things that I loved though. I love it that B doesn't like the Fool, because I was like, yes, B, this is why you're my favorite. You get it. Like, we don't like the Fool. Because, and I think at one point she even says like, the Fool is invasive and rude, and I'm like, yes, that is why. He doesn't respect boundaries. He doesn't have reasonable expectations of how a dynamic and relationship works between people in like multiple relationships, not even just him and Fitz, but like how he's thinking about his dynamic with B. Like, there's so many things. Anyways, I was like, thank God for B, who understands that the Fool is invasive and rude and doesn't like him. And I'm just like, yes, you were correct. I also was, this is much more minor, but like, oh my God, Nettle was annoying me at the end when she is taking care of B. Like, I totally get why Nettle was doing what she was doing, and she really was doing what she thought was best and trying to help B in the only way she knew how, and that's like totally understandable. But also, because I'm like all in for B, I was like so frustrated with Nettle and how like rigid and controlling she was, and how much she really was so like, she really wouldn't like get to know B as an individual. She was much more just like, well, this is how you are supposed to do things, or how like I think we need to do it, so we're just going to do it. It doesn't matter if it works for this individual. And she was just really annoying me. I also really didn't like the way things ended for Fitz. I didn't like his death scene. It just felt very like, it's one of those times where I'm like, I get that it in some ways it's very like full circle, because he got to die in a way that felt very similar to Verity, which was very meaningful to him. So like, I get that, and that's cool. I also in a lot of ways think he should have just had a normal death, and not necessarily like lived forever in a stone wolf. I think it would have been, to me, it would have been more satisfying if he just got to have some degree of like being a normal person. Maybe I don't fully understand Fitz, I don't know, but my feeling about him is that like, he just wants a normal life, and that like there are just all of these circumstances that kept pulling him away from being able to have the normal life he wanted. So I kind of wish that he had had a more normal death. I also really hated that it turned into a spectacle, you know, that there were people like watching him, and like he would not have wanted that. B knows he would not have wanted that, and yet they're still, even at the last, they're like, oh, but he has to, you know, be this kind of spectacle because he is a Farseer and he is a prince, and so everyone has to be able to like watch him die. Oh my gosh. Like, I just hate it that they can't ever just leave him alone and just let him have something, or do something his own way, or have some degree of privacy, because everything has to be sacrificed. It just was, I just didn't like that. I also, because I was on this whole rampage about hating the Fool, I was annoyed that the Fool ended up being a part of the wolf. Like, I think it should have just been, like, also again, I get why he's there. I don't care. I wanted it to just be Fitz and Night Eyes. The two of them had a great relationship and they should like live forever together. And I know that Fitz wanted him there, but again, I don't think that, like, just because Fitz would want him there doesn't mean it's good for him. And I don't know. I think that the Fool isn't good for him, doesn't respect boundaries, and shouldn't be given eternal access to Fitz. But that's just my opinion. You know, I think that my feelings about the Fool and his relationship to Fitz is probably a fairly unpopular opinion, but it is what it is. Something that I didn't necessarily like or dislike, I had kind of mixed feelings about, was the pacing of this book. Pacing is always a thing in Hobbs books that I often, maybe not always, but I often have an issue with the pacing of them. This one I had kind of mixed feelings about it because I found some of the pacing both frustrating but also very understandable. So like, especially in kind of the middle chunk of the book, there's a point where both storylines that were like, both perspective storylines that we're following make such small incremental changes that it feels like nothing is happening. It feels like it's just kind of biding its time or treading water for a little while. But also, like, okay, so then about Bee's, like, perspective specifically, I have kind of mixed feelings in that I was getting kind of exhausted by her storyline because it started to feel very circular, because it started to go very like, she would have an opportunity, she would escape, she would do something, and then of course she would always be captured again, and it was feeling very circular. However, that that one I totally understand why that was happening, because I think as exhausting as it was for me as a reader, it was probably even more exhausting, you know, for the character, and it also was really driving home this feeling of hopelessness that like, no matter what she did, no matter what opportunity she had, no matter what she tried, she always got captured again. And so it was like frustrating to read, but I think that it was effective in bringing the reader along with the character's experience and kind of evoking an emotion that was created through that experience, but could not have been just communicated through telling you, oh, she's feeling hopeless and trapped. So I think that that made sense. It just was like exhausting to read. I did like though how the two perspectives that we were following really were really contrasting with one another, because that like desperation and chaos and hopelessness of Bee's perspective for so much of the book was in such clear contrast to Fitz's perspective, and how for most of his like traveling and story, it was pretty calm. You know, he was able to, you know, work with the people around him. He got, you know, on a ship. Although there were some hiccups along the way, it was pretty smooth sailing for Fitz for most of the book. And so it created this very clear contrast between his experience of getting to the servants with the, as I said, like chaos of how Bee got there. Then some things that I have questions about. There are probably lots more things that I have questions about, but my main things are really about the live ships and the wizard wood and the turning into dragons. Okay, so my understanding of how the dragons work from the Rainwild Chronicles is that the wizard wood itself is more like an eggshell, which the dragons eventually absorb, and so they absorb those memories that are locked in it, but the wizard wood is not the dragon, it is the shell that holds the memories, and that there is a dragon inside the wizard wood shell. And also every time they have described how the wizard wood was like harvested to make these boats, is that they would like cut it open, dump out the like baby dragon essentially that was inside, and then take the wizard wood as like a shell with them. So it doesn't make sense to me how the ship, even with like incredible amounts of silver, it doesn't make sense how the ship would turn into a dragon, because the wizard wood itself is not the dragon. It's like the eggshell, and like, yes, it has all of these memories of the dragon, but it is not the dragon. So like that is like, there are a lot of magic things that I'll just kind of go with it. That is one step too far for me personally, of like, it works because it's magic. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. The other thing that I was wondering though is, because the ships are made out of wizard wood, why is it that the people who live on these ships are not affected in the same way that the Rainwilders are, who are changed by living in close proximity to dragons? Because the people who live on these ships are living in close proximity to this wizard wood, and especially if we were making the argument that the wizard wood is a dragon somehow and can turn into a dragon, then it should be dragon-like enough to change the sailors in the same way that the Rainwilders are changed by living in proximity with dragons. That also is a thing that doesn't make sense to me. Okay, and then finally, to talk about the ending. I already talked about this a little bit, about how I don't really like the way that Fitz's story ended, that he was put into the Stone Wolf, the way that all came about. I think that he should have had just a more normal death. I feel like that would have suited him better, but we already talked about that. I really did like the scenes though between Fitz and Bee. I mean, one, Bee is involved, so I just like it better. But although in some ways they had kind of a difficult relationship, or at least like it was kind of confusing to both of them. They didn't really know how to connect with each other, but the moments that they had together, and especially the moments when Bee really understood how much Fitz loves her, whether it was because like even earlier in the book when they're on the ship ride home, and Perseverance tells Bee the whole story of everything that they went through to get her, and she realizes like the whole time that she thought her father wasn't coming for her, that he was like coming the entire time, and he went through so many things and traveled so far to get her, and how meaningful that was to her. It was like so emotional to me. I loved those moments when she really realized how much Fitz loved her. And then there are moments where she kind of gets to see into him see into his mind or his emotions, and gets to feel how much he loves her. And those were really the most emotional moments to me, and I definitely did tear up during those. I also, the moments between, some of the moments between Fitz and Perseverance, especially ones when Perseverance the first time hears that Fitz is dead, and then like towards the end as well, there's something about their dynamic that I just really loved as well, and I found very moving. So yeah, the dynamic between Bee and Fitz and Perseverance, I think that for all his faults, one of the things that I liked most about Fitz was this very fatherly role that he took for so many different people, and how seriously he took that role to prepare them for life and make sure that they're going to be good people, and how much he cared about them. And so I really loved those moments. The moments at the end between Fitz and the Fool were moments where I feel like we're supposed to be emotional, and I was reading them and I was like, I feel nothing. zero caring about how sad the fool is or whatever it is he wants out of the situation. Like, the fool's, whatever it is the fool wants or needs, I'm just like, don't care. Like, he's done. We're done with him. So, you know, the ending, lots of mixed emotions. It was a very emotional ending, and there were definitely some very moving parts of it. I really, like, I'm glad that I am finished with this series. The one thing that I would want to know more about is kind of what happens to Bee. I would love to know what becomes of her, because she's still only like 9 years old. I also am very curious as to whether she uses her, you know, white prophet abilities anymore, because from what I could tell, she seems to think that her like calling that every white prophet has, that like moment in history that they are meant to shape, she seems to think that the events of this final book was that for her, that like taking down the servants, burning their library, like that was the thing that she was meant to do to change the course of history, and that she has kind of accomplished her purpose as a white prophet. And so I would love to know, like, is that the case, or is there yet more that she needs to do to shape the future as a white prophet? I think that'd be really interesting. This was another thing, this is a bit of a tangent, but she was saying how she thought, was it the woman's name, like Dwalia or something, was her catalyst. I don't think so. I think Bee is her own catalyst. I think the combination of being like a farseer with the skill and being a white prophet, I think she's her own catalyst. But that's beside the point. Anyway, I would love to know more about what happens to Bee. I think that's kind of the only thing that is outstanding in my mind of like things that I would want to know more about. Anyways, I would love to know your thoughts about this final book, this final trilogy. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.